I had made the terrible mistake of not playing any of the classic Valve games, up until now that is. I recently played through Portal 2, and I can't begin to tell you just how easily and how fast I fell in love with the game. The game just hits every button, pulls every lever. It hooked me in as soon as it began with its characters, story, and the gameplay. This is just going to be hopefully a short video with a couple key elements that made me fall in love with the game as quickly as they did. I know that saying that Valve's games are masterpieces is not exactly breaking any new ground, but I still want to share my opinion and ideas. Spoilers for the story of Portal, of course. I'm not gonna go into too much depth, but I will mention some important plot points. So without further ado, let's begin. Portal 2 is much bigger than Portal 1, in almost every sense of the word. Portal 2 is considerably longer than Portal 1, and not only that, but the gameplay offers a whole lot more with new and interesting test chambers and a whole lot more mechanics like the gels, laser beams, aerial faith plates, light bridges, and the excursion funnels. But the test chambers aren't the only things that got an improvement. Aperture Science has never felt bigger in scale, and the initial sequence of the game drives it forward in more ways than one. Ever since the events of Portal 1, you've been brought back down to Aperture Science and placed in a pod. You've been asleep for a lot of time. However, something happened in the facility and the power went out, so it's time to escape alongside your fun little companion Whitley, who informs you of the situation, hints at the fact that you may not be the only human in here, and helps you escape. And as he accidentally and slowly breaks the entire room around you, you can see more and more of the facility itself. And as soon as I saw this, I just couldn't believe it. I was simply amazed at the sheer size of this place. And this isn't even close to being the biggest place in the game. As soon as you fall down to Old Aperture, the environment is gigantic, and the environments get bigger and bigger in scale as the game progresses. It subtly puts into perspective just how gigantic these laboratories are. But just the scale alone is not the only thing that makes the environments incredibly interesting to be in. Portal 2 has a great atmosphere. Aperture never felt more alive. Yeah, kind of an odd word to describe it, but there's a reason why I use that word. There's always something going on in Aperture. Be it rooms that are being repaired, parts of rooms that are malfunctioning, turrets being constructed or destroyed, gels being transported throughout the facility. There's always something going on, like the facility is still operating, like the facility is still running. And when there isn't, and it's only you, the ominous sounds of the facility itself is enough to really put into perspective just how alone you are. Be it the mechanical sounds of modern Aperture, or the creaking and falling apart noises of underground Old Aperture. You can also find the remnants of what happened before you arrived into the facilities while exploring. The Aperture laboratories are completely destroyed, and some areas, aside from the obvious growth of nature around it, show a lot of broken equipment or windows that I can only imagine was the result of the scientists trying to escape GLaDOS's neurotoxin. You can really see the effects of GLaDOS's quick and sudden attack on the scientists and staff. Everything feels abandoned, everything feels like people had to run away from something. And the underground Aperture is filled with interesting lore and secrets, like Cave Johnson and Caroline's painting, or just the linear rooms you have to traverse in that are filled with interesting dialogue from Cave Johnson and interesting aesthetics, like waiting rooms, rooms with elevators, or rooms with desks on them. It really feels like there was people working here, and it's not just rooms that you have to go through. It feels like this was an actual legit facility that people worked at. It's great. Speaking of Cave Johnson, even though you don't actually meet that many people in the world of Portal, the few people that you meet are really fun and interesting personalities on their own. Whitley is of course one of the stars of the game. He always has something funny to say, he always has something to say in general, and there's many fun and interesting interactions with him. If you played Portal 2, then you already know that Wheatley is the actual villain of the game, having been created specifically to keep GLaDOS's mental abilities in check with an endless stream of stupid ideas. It is never really known if Wheatley knew this, or has been taunted in the past about this, but whenever GLaDOS brings it up, Wheatley's personality quickly changes from his fun, lighthearted, comical attitude to a more unstable, spiteful, hateful one. And this is just amplified even more by the fact that he becomes obsessed with the power he has over the facility once his cord is transferred, and grows quickly spiteful of both GLaDOS and Shell, who funnily enough never said a word in the entire game. GLaDOS herself has some interesting and good interactions, and funnily enough a development in her character. Initially she starts as very passive-aggressive towards you, still maintaining her attitude of wanting to test, but either insulting you all the time or blocking your progress. However, as soon as she's turned into a potato and both of you get thrown down into old Aperture, she begins to act more as a companion, mostly because she knows you're her only hope of getting back to her body, but also because of the interactions on the way up. She knows that the chances of actually completing their plan is less than zero, but she didn't count on Shell's stubbornness. And while you're on your way to actually fight with Wheatley for the last time, once more she recognizes that while the chances of winning are basically zero, she'd at least want to try and put up a fight instead of giving up. The most radical change, I think, is right at the end of the game, where GLaDOS has a really sudden change and even calls you, the player, and Shell a best friend. Most of these changes, I think, are the cause of one very important character that you meet. Well, you don't actually meet him, but you hear him and his recordings. Cave Johnson, the CEO of Aperture Science. At first, he comes across as a funny person, in similar fashion to the generic male robot at the beginning and GLaDOS herself. He makes funny comments about tests or other related stuff. But he also gives a ton of insight into his own life, slowly becoming more frustrated and kind of depressed due to the experiments and the facility not going the way he expected, and his own lethal illness threatening his life. Not only that, but he also gives us some insight into the facilities themselves, with comments about test subjects running low, for example, having to offer people on the streets $60 per test, and treating them like garbage. I slowly began to feel kind of weirded out. There are some optional audios in which you can hear the very questionable things that Aperture did to the test subjects, like replacing their blood with gasoline, or injecting them with Mantis DNA, just to name a few. He also makes some not-so-subtle comments about the rival company and their own experiments, Black Mesa. Part of the change in GLaDOS is mostly due to her remembering her past before she was turned into an AI, hinted at by an optional painting in an optional area you can enter in old Aperture, and confirmed later on in the game. GLaDOS was Caroline, Cave Johnson's assistant, who he demanded should be in charge of the facilities in case he died. And it's safe to say that most of GLaDOS' interactions whenever Cave speaks are one of my favorites in the game. The more radical change in GLaDOS is right at the end when he calls Shell her best friend, and proceeds to not only let Shell go, but say that she deleted the Caroline part of her personality, which I think is kind of weird considering that GLaDOS is Caroline and Caroline is GLaDOS. I'm pretty sure that GLaDOS lied on that instance, but it's up for debate really, we don't really know. Still, it was a pretty oddly heartwarming moment because you actually feel like you kind of bonded with GLaDOS in some really weird way, considering that your story and GLaDOS' story go all the way back to Portal 1, and you've been hanging out with GLaDOS for the majority of Portal 2. And finally, to top it all off, just a small detail, but one that is very, very important to me. The level of interaction you have with the world in Portal 2 is insane. And the fact that these are interactions that were built into the game is just great to me. These are the kind of details that really make me forget that this is a video game, and they immerse me into the world. Let me explain. Throughout the game, there's many interactions that a player that isn't paying attention could very well miss, like not doing what a character tells you to do.
It's alright, no, go on, just have a look about. No, that's right. Over by the podium, yeah. If you just, okay, just stand by the podium and just look up.
Doing what a character tells you to do.
No, seriously, do come back, please. Come back, please. Oh, you came back. I didn't plan for this. Can't reset the death trap. Oh, could you just jump into that pit? Would you just jump into that pit for me? Would you just jump into that pit there? That deadly pit. You're saying to yourself, why should I jump in the pit? I'll tell you why. Guess who's down there? Your parents! You're not adopted after all. It's your natural parents down there in the pit. Should have mentioned it before, but I didn't. So jump on down.
Or accessing some areas in which the character you're with has something to say about. And some of these even happen unscripted sequences when you're supposed to do a thing that triggers a response in the other character. For example, in the last fight against Whitley, I held on to every personality core for as long as I possibly could, having to reload the game multiple times because I died thanks to that. But I was awarded because if you hang on to the adventurer personality core for too long, he'll say this.
It's gonna be best if you can get him to say something first. Just better if I have a son. Here's the plan. Get him to say, you two have been a thorn in my side long enough. Then tell your pretty ears to stand back, because I'm gonna sink him into the Stone Age. Here, let me put on some adventure music.
And after you defeated Whitley, this happens.
You have been a thorn in my side long enough.
Yeah, well, this thorn is about to take you down. Man, that sounded a whole lot better in my head.
Does this change the story in any meaningful way? Not really, but it gives me a weird sense of satisfaction knowing that this happened because of my input, and that this interaction could have been missed by another player who didn't hold onto the personality core for as long as I did. Better yet, on a scripted sequence like when you have to replace the turret from a new one into a broken turret, Whitley acknowledges the fact that you're leaving the room, something that in other games would be glossed over because it's not important or because it's just a game. These kinds of interactions are vital to immerse the player into your world, in my opinion. And the delivery of these interactions are just as important. Whitley's voice acting is one of the best voice acting I've heard in video games. In one of the final rooms, if you smash Whitley's monitor, he will answer either unamused or angry. And I did this by absolute mistake. I didn't even think that it would work, but it did. The level of attention to detail is insane in this game. One last interaction I want to talk about is the Oracle turret, the turret you meet in the beginning of the game. You meet the turret once more on its way to destruction, but if you pick the turret up, it will not only say thank you, but also tell you very important stuff that made my mind race once I heard it, and blew my mind whenever I realized what the turret was talking about later on in the game.
Don't like lemonade. Prometheus was punished by the gods for giving the gift of knowledge to man. He was cast into the bowels of the earth, picked by birds. It won't be enough. The answer is beneath us. Her name is Carolyn. Remember that. That's all I can say.
Another cool thing that I found out is that certain actions will trigger certain sound effects or certain very brief soundtracks. Like for example, whenever you jump on the air on one of these platforms, or whenever you're bouncing around in the gel or running in the gel. And the fact that they put these little details there and they only happen whenever the player does something, it's just really insane. It blew my mind whenever I found out about this. I'm sure I left out some other important things, but I really just wanted to make a really short video, and saying that the story and gameplay of Portal 2 is great is pretty redundant at this point because they are, and everyone knows that, and it's enhanced even more by interactions that the player can trigger that I spoke about earlier. There's even more stuff that I didn't even find. I didn't even find all of Ratman's dens or secret messages. I didn't even find the Easter egg referencing the old lost Borealis ship from Half-Life 2, and I'm pretty sure there's a couple more interactions that I didn't even find yet. I've also yet to play the developer commentary mode, which probably adds a lot more to the experience. And co-op mode is also interesting, giving a slightly more expanded information on what happens after Portal 2 with the 2 robots that replace tech subjects, which funnily enough only exist for the purpose of freeing the thousands of humans stored away deep in Aperture laboratories and are destroyed as soon as they save science. I don't have the same nostalgic love for this game as others may have. However, having played this game and having played Team Fortress 2 for as long as I can remember, something that I realized after playing Portal 2 is that back when Valve made games, they really went the extra mile to make their games as polished, interesting, and mysterious, and as fun as they possibly could. And I think that just because of that, their games deserve to be played and talked about. If you haven't already played the Portal series, or any other Valve game for that matter, please do yourself a favor and play through them. They're probably one of the best gaming experiences you'll have. I still haven't played the Half-Life games yet, so maybe I will take a look at those and talk about them too. Who knows? But for now, I just want to thank you for watching my video. If you want to check out my art or see what I'm up to, please follow my social media links in the description. Please tell me what you thought about in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one.